All right, and welcome to the second episode of The Beautiful Mind in the Beautiful Gabe. Gabe, no, that's Gabe. I'm Gabe. Gabe Nosseir. And with me, as always, is my good friend Chris Wehan. Welcome, Chris, to the second one. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Gabe. I'm excited to be here and really pumped that we're doing this and we're back for episode 2. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, great. So, in case you missed the first episode, we really focused on the player-parent relationship. And in this episode, we're going to focus on the coach-player relationship, something that we both have a lot of experience doing. Chris, do you want to remind everyone your background in playing soccer?
Yeah, so my background, I played soccer my whole life growing up. Was fortunate to attend the University of New Mexico to play college soccer, where we were introduced to each other, and then was fortunate to go on and play professional soccer for 7 years in both the USL and the MLS. And now I'm so excited to be diving into my next career, my next chapter of life, coaching. Being a source of light and positivity and love for athletes, not only on the field but also off the field. More importantly, what I feel more drawn to in the mental side of the sport.
Awesome. Yeah, I remember you actually when you came in as a freshman, very slight frame, and I vividly remember because I would go watch because my team, I was done coaching with my team at that point because they moved on and were college. My guys were a little older than you were. So I would come and watch preseason and I was like, who is that little freshman like kind of like floating around the field? And yeah, it was very enjoyable. So it's been neat to see your progress as an 18-year-old and through your professional career. So really excited to be doing this. And you had quite a coaching staff at the University of New Mexico that was, gave you a lot of tools for what you experienced as a professional. And I kind of want to jump in there. Like, what was that coaching staff like for you, and how did they impact you to become the not just the player who you are, but the person who you are?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, I was so fortunate in my career in soccer to have phenomenal coaches along the way, up until the towards the end of my career, where the coach player relationship became more demanding. But what I remember the most about my coaches at UNM, and what stands out the most when you were asking me the question, the thing that came to me was Paul Souders. He was the assistant coach, or I can't remember if he was the associate head coach at the time, someone that you and I know very well. The assistant coach now, or associate head coach at UCF men's soccer. But my freshman year was particularly challenging because I was redshirting, but they didn't necessarily come and tell me at the beginning, like, hey, you're going to redshirt and, we still value you, but this is just the way it is. It kind of was something that I figured out along the way. Obviously, the first couple road trips I wasn't traveling, and that's when it kind of started to sink in, and kind of became a challenging time. The best thing about that coaching staff, particularly Paul and Brandon Moss at the time was the assistant coach as well. Not so much Fish, because I think Fish was the player manager. He had a lot going on, but Paul and Brandon Moss did an excellent job of, their door was open. And when I say it wasn't just the coach saying, my door is always open, but that means you don't go in there. They really had an open door policy, and they gave me the space to really bring my, issues, my challenges of being a redshirt and, being in a different state, away from home for the first time, sort of all the things that you go through as a young athlete. And they gave me the space to sort of, put that on the table and to be like, this is hard. And for them to recognize, like, we know it's hard, we know it's challenging, and like, this is what we envision for you. And it was really comforting to have a coach like that presented that safe space for me as an athlete.
Yeah, I think a lot of coaches, and correct me if I'm wrong, but they don't quite get that piece because a lot of what happens with coaching at the higher levels, especially and especially in the professional level, it becomes very transactional, especially when there's a lot of money involved. And it's kind of like, what are you doing for me? If you're not helping me to succeed as a coach, I'm going to kind of overlook you. Is that kind of accurate, you feel?
Oh yeah, I think for sure. And I think the sad reality is that it's becoming more like that in college soccer, which is really sad to hear. And I know speaking to Paul and other college soccer coaches, it is becoming more transactional because it becomes with the transfer portal and other things, it becomes, hey, I'm not playing, well, I'm out of here. And I think good coaches want to offer that space for kids to understand, hey, this is a 4-year commitment. In soccer, it's a long commitment because at the next level, you're lucky if you get a 2 or a 3-year contract as a young player. It's really hard to come by, and so I think that's the sad reality. And yeah, in professional sports, it becomes very transactional, and everything is results based. That I think would be a great topic for us to talk about is how you balance that getting results, but also developing and, having relationships with players.
Hmm. Yeah, because I've worked with some coaches who kind of looked at players and were like, if you're not going to get it done for me, I'm just going to move on to the next one. And for me, I never approached coaching like that at any level because I always knew that my role or my desired was to get the most out of somebody. I think a lot of coaches forget that they're not coaches, they're teachers. And like they're supposed to teach them if somebody has some sort of deficiency, whether it's they're not in shape, they're struggling with their first touch or finishing or whatever, like they're there to shoot them, not or to, I'm sorry, not there to shoot them. They're there to support them to develop, and I think so many of them just kind of push them off to the side and said, all right, who's up next? Who's going to get it done for me? And then you're out of here, and I'm going to bring someone else in from some other team and hope that they work out.
Yeah, 100%. And I think I've even had that conversation with players at the professional level is that it's understandable to not necessarily be the coach's guy or to be on the outside looking in terms of there's 11 guys that are on the field and maybe 26 to 30 players on the roster. So that's a lot of guys that aren't out, but I'm curious to know I'm curious to pick your brain on this. Like, what are some things that coaches could do to make every player feel like they're valuable on the roster, right? Because some players told me like, I just am not the coach's guy. And no matter what I do, I feel like I'm not going to play. But crazy things happen in sports, and anyone can get called on at any point with injuries or suspensions or whatever.
Mhm.
And so I'm curious to know, what do you think, or some coaches that you've been around that really have skills to treat everyone like they're a valuable piece, even if they're not playing a
Mhm.
lot?
Right. I think that's where conscious leadership comes in, and I feel like things are shifting towards that. If coaches can go in there, first of all, set an intention and an understanding that they're there like they're teachers, right? But they're there also to support these people. These people are human beings. I don't care if they're 6 years old or 36 on the other side of the hill as a soccer player, like they're there to support them as human beings and to really operate more from their heart. I think what you said about what Paul and Brandon gave to you that freshman year of yours was just that validation, I'm sure meant so much, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, just to understand like, hey, we know this is hard, for you, and just to hang in there. Sometimes just hearing that validation in any relationship, whether it's with a partner, with a friend, or especially here in with a coach, hearing that like, I understand what you're going through is just importantly valuable. And I think a lot of coaches struggle with that, but I think the athletes these days are asking for that, don't you think?
Yeah, I think I had just heard that in a podcast yesterday. This woman was speaking, she was referring back to her old corporate job when she used to be in customer service for some big company. And oftentimes people were on the phone for a long time before they were able to connect to an agent, and they were very angry. And that they were taught to validate that anger to get that person to lower their emotional state. And I
Hmm.
related that so much, it made me think of coaching as well. And that's 100% what Paul was able and Brandon Moss were able to do for me. It was say, man, we see how hard you're working. Like we know you're a great player. We value you, even though you're not getting that return in terms of playing time. We have, I know it's hard for you to understand, but we have such a long-term vision for you. And that really did like allow me to know that I was seen, to know that one, I was safe to even bring my emotions to the table. And because I was physically emotional in that moment. I was, I was crying, and I was expressing how hard it was to redshirt, and they gave me that space. And I think back to other times when I would bring something to a coach. I remember later in my career, I brought something to a coach and I said to him, I was having a hard time connecting with the player that I was directly in relationship with. So I was playing as a number 10, attacking center mid, and there was a number 9 I was playing with, and there just wasn't the connection. It was really hard to explain, but it just was, we were on different pages. And there was another player that was on the roster that him and I had an incredible on the field connection. We weren't great friends off the field, but when I brought to the coach if he had considered looking at us, even just in training together, fostering that relationship, he shut me down immediately, and didn't validate me at all. And that became, I knew that it was not safe for me to sort of bring my thoughts to the table.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a tough one because, in my opinion, the team doesn't belong to the coach. The team, it's everybody working together. The coach just happens to be in a leadership position, but everyone's an integral part of the team. And a lot of coaches, I mean, you've been through it, there's so much ego involved, right? If somebody questions you, and the ego, the biggest fear of the ego is not feeling important enough, or not, being important enough in the person's mind. So when somebody else challenges you, especially a subordinate, right? A lot of coaches can push back. Instead, I think the mature coach can be secure enough in themselves and be like, okay, hey, yeah, let me listen to you. Maybe there's something in there for me. Maybe I can listen. And if not, to say, hey, I get what you mean, but here's why we do that, and then sometimes the player then can understand, like, oh, okay, that makes sense now, and I can see maybe where I don't fit, but I think the best coaches out there are the ones who can listen to their players and have like the leadership within the team step up and to feel comfortable with that. I mean, having free flowing communication among each other within reason, of course, that ultimately the coach makes the decision, but to have that type of communication style is so valuable. I grew up in my younger childhood in Columbus, Ohio. So I love watching Ohio State football. And last year was just to me an amazing year to watch and Ryan Day's development as a coach. I could guarantee that he worked with somebody on team culture because whenever he was interviewed, he was always praising like, hey, this is about them. We have great leadership, we're brotherhood, and you could really feel that. And they struggled. They ended up losing 2 games in the regular season, especially the last regular season game to their arch rival. And after that game, the players got together and they talked to the coaches and then and said, like, hey, we weren't playing, we were playing out of fear because you guys were coaching out of fear. And the coaching staff really like took that and they knew it, so they kind of unleashed the team. And then in their postseason, of course, they went on and destroyed everybody on their way to the national championship. But that wouldn't have happened if Ryan Day was like, no, it's our way. We're doing things here. If you don't like it, get out of here. I'm sure you experienced some coaches like that. Actually, I know you did. So if you want to share any stories about that,
Yeah,
how it was for you.
that's a phenomenal story, and I didn't know that. I appreciate you sharing that. That's it's got to be, and like I haven't been in a coaching position at a high level, but I've been in locker rooms at a high level, and I think for the coach to be humble enough to and open enough to take information from the players like that can only, in my opinion, foster positivity. One, I think
Mhm.
to allow the players to be confident enough to come together and say, hey, because, and to value everyone's opinion, right? It starts with that, the players coming together and being like, this is what I think is going on. And then to collaborate on that and come together to a common thing. Hey, maybe we're playing out of fear. And then to address the coaches. And the hardest thing is probably you want to fight back on that. You want to say, well, you don't know, you're just the players, like you don't know what we do, and you don't know how hard we work behind the scenes, and you don't know what our thought process is. But to be open and say, okay, let us take that and sit and see if we really analyze ourselves. And because I'm sure there's coaches on the coaching staff that felt we are 100% operating out of fear, but to allow, that's amazing. In my experience, I really, I without saying any names or anything, there was one particular place where the coach was operating out of fear, and I know that it was some part from within him, but also from the leadership above him, with the general manager and ownership group that was really unhappy with the way things are going. And the sad reality is in sport is someone's going to get blamed or held responsible, and it's oftentimes the coach.
Mhm.
And this coach in particular led with fear, and that fear often came out in anger towards us. And when that happened, I think it really diminished the human to human relationship, and it really started to foster a subordinate relationship. I am in charge. You have to listen to me and do as I say so that we can get the result. And that's I always use this analogy that soccer, playing at the high level, it's the margin for error is so small. The difference between us and the other team is so minimal. And so when we within our group are fighting battles, to go and fight the other team on the field becomes so difficult when we have our own internal ugliness going on. At least that's how I felt.
Mhm. Yeah. The players can have so much value if they're able to express themselves. When I coached, not early on. Early on, it was the halftime speeches was what, my opinion. And then later, I developed more maturity, and at halftime, it was every game. They'd come and sit down. I'd let them hydrate, and I'll say, okay, what are you guys seeing out there? Because sometimes I don't see everything, You have one vantage point, but sometimes you don't know the little details of what they're experiencing, or at least they can maybe tell you what they're experiencing, and you can help them to move on from that and the decisions that they need to make. But sometimes, you can get an opinion and be like, wow, and you know what? Okay, I can see that now that that's happening. It's something I didn't see. But that conscious coaching is just so important these days. And it all to me it all starts with that intention of like, let me make these people better human beings. And let me make sure, for especially on the competitive side, I want my players running through a brick wall for me. And the only way to do that, you can motivate through fear, right? But it's, as soon as something bad happens, then it's all over, right? You get found out very easily. but you can motivate so much more stronger through love. And when somebody really cares and they feel like they have a deep connection with you, then they will really run through anything for you. Don't you agree or disagree?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's so well said. And I think the bottom line, it just comes from trust, and it comes from a place of love, but I think from a player coach perspective, it just comes from the fact that, hey, at the bottom line, I think this coach actually cares about me, right?
Mhm.
Even if you're not playing, if you feel like that coach would do something for you, or would, you know, would is actually interested in who you are as a human being, and sort of what you have going on off the field and who you are as a person, then I think that gives that player that little edge to be able to run through that wall for that coach. And
Mhm.
it allows for openness, or I always felt like with my coaches at UNM, with Paul and Moss and Fish, that they cared about us as people, and they cared about developing us as human beings as well as soccer players and to succeed on the field. But ultimately, they really cared about us as human beings, and I think that goes such a long way. When a coach only cares about you as a asset on the field, either you're going to help me win games or you're not, then that relationship, it's not it. I don't know the right word, but it just becomes almost fake, almost fraudulent. It feels like. What do you think about
Yeah.
that?
It's very shallow, right? And it's
Yeah,
not
shallow.
sustainable, yeah, to have like success in the long term, you know. No, you're absolutely right. Like to me, coaching is just like any kind of super deep, intimate relationship. You know, if you're able to be open and vulnerable with each other, it's going to be more successful. You know, but if you can't be honest and vulnerable with each other, it's going to fail. You know, if people are walking around on eggshells all the time, you're not going to have much success, you know, and especially at the professional level, right? Like you have these very little real things that are like, this is your job. You know, if you're not performing, you're going to be out because, you know, to me, it's way easier to become a professional than it is to stay a professional for many years, you know, because there's always the next crop of players coming in, right? So in order to get the best out of people, like you want them to be comfortable within themselves. And that's something that's 100% dependent on the staff, right? It trickles down, their energy trickles down to everybody. And that's something that it took me, you know, a while to learn, you know, from as a young coach. I started coaching at 18, so it's very much about ego at those days. And then you know, it developed much more when I really started to connect deeply, and I had like a deep love for my players. They're really able to perform at a much higher level because they could feel that connection, you know, like intimacy exists on so many levels, you know, like it's not just intimacy with a partnership, you know, husband or wife or boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever. Like we have so many deep, intimate relationships with our children, with, you know, obviously with the people that we're coaching, that they're all kind of based on the same thing. If you have that connection with somebody, then they're going to flourish.
Yeah, and that's really why I chose to. I'm choosing coaching, and why I'm choosing to build and foster those relationships with my athletes, because I often see that the player coach relationship is not a healthy one. And so these players are left looking for confidence. They're left looking for someone that genuinely cares about them. And that's the space that I'm creating for my athletes on the field and off the field, is to say, hey, I know it's hard. I know
Mhm.
you have big dreams, and how can we build that together, and how can you have a safe space to sort of unload some of this heaviness? Because yeah, I think coaches, and as I've been around, getting around the youth scene, like some coaches or some clubs have started to have rules like almost they think that they're protecting, but really they're just basically saying, well, coaches coach and they don't have any relationship with parents and their athletes. And to me, that's crazy. Like there needs to be a closeness. The best coaches are the ones that first and foremost, like, are willing to high five and hug an athlete and to care about them as a person, as a human being. And then they step onto the field and they train or they have a game. But ultimately that player knows that this person cares about me.
Yeah. That's what it's all about. So let me ask you a question. If you have a coach who you're not getting that from, how do you handle that as a player?
That's a great question. And to be honest, it was difficult for me later in my career when I started having these relationships with coaches that were not healthy. And I didn't handle it well. I think I often you'd seek the people that care about you, which are your teammates, and coming home to my wife, and I would unload all this baggage on them. And I think I was also expecting them to be able to lift me up. But
Mm.
I think everything starts with the self. Most importantly, loving yourself through it. I think there's healthy habits around meditating and, I think just understanding that this relationship is here to make me stronger as an athlete, and it's not here to make me worse, even though it feels in the moment like playing for this coach is making me worse. That's how I felt too.
Mhm.
But really it was sharpening me and it was making me stronger, and I didn't always recognize that. I think too there has to be an understanding that what comes around goes around in this sport, and by really leaning into healthy habits, by taking care of myself, by finding a coach, someone that is a safe place, which was you at times for me in my career, and other coaches and people that I've had to safely unload this information, to get a different understanding of it, to ultimately look out for myself. Because oftentimes, if a coach isn't, it's sort of karma that, if a coach is operating from the ego or not the best in terms of fostering a good culture, that they will be found out at a certain point, and that it will correct itself and a better coach or something different. Or in my case, I was sent to a different situation, which was also a relief for me. But I think the best habit is to remember that you have to look out for yourself in the most difficult moments, because if you don't create those good habits, then you'll fall apart, and which is sort of what happened with me.
Mhm. Yeah, I think, what I picked up from what you were just talking about is when I work with people, I say, okay, in this situation, what can you change, right? And what do you have no control over? And what do you have control over?
Hmm.
And sometimes, yeah, you don't have control over how a coach is going to respond or react to you, especially when they're not really more aware of themselves and they are operating more from their false selves. But overall, like you can control your attitude as a player, right? And sometimes you have to grind it out and you have to kind of surrender to like and to understand the futility of life sometimes, that you're not going to have control over every situation, and to just do your best of whatever you can. If you're not getting playing time and you're working hard, and so be it. And then, when the season ends, you can hopefully find a better situation for yourself, or one will find you. But I think too, what's biggest, what you talked about, is if you don't have that support to rely on your teammates, and also the importance of, having that support at home. I think that's where parents of young athletes, especially, that really need to understand like, hey, they're not getting that love and that nurturance from their coach. Let me at least provide for it here and not applying pressure on them because if they're not getting the support they need from their coach and then at home they're getting too much pressure, then it's a recipe for disaster for the youth athlete. So that's why like that support system really comes in handy when the coaching staff isn't on the more conscious side. Um, Now, what do you think as far as advice for coaches? Like, what kind of advice would you give them when supporting, especially youth athletes, since we're really focusing a lot on them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think really understanding. I think the first it starts with openness. I think openness to receive feedback from parents or players, and probably for youth coaches, it's from the parents. Um, and I think in preseason or post-season meetings, like if you feel like there's a disconnect, if results weren't going your way, that openness to say to the parents like, hey, like where can I be better, or be what do you guys need more of from me to
Mhm.
foster a better culture. I think there's obvious signs, and that is if players and parents are looking to leave, that's an obvious sign. If they don't want to communicate, that's another obvious sign because they don't feel safe to. But I think it really starts with the openness, and I think asking themselves, am I doing this for me, or am I doing this for them? Because I agree, coaching is not for the coach, it's for the athletes. It's to guide them and assist them and teach them, like you said, lessons on the
Mhm.
field and off the field. And if you love doing that, if you sort of love to let that knowledge and experience and love come through you to them rather than you doing it for you. What would you
Mhm.
what would you advise for coaches yourself, having worked with a number of coaches?
Mhm. I think, exactly what you talked about, right? And for them to be aware of themselves and are they operating for themselves or for the kids, and to understand like sometimes you're going to have that other side that's going to be like, hey, this is going to make you look good or this is going to be a really big win for you. So to just acknowledge that, but then to still be able to shift back into the present moment and be like, okay, I know that part of me exists, but let me stay focused on these guys here and like this is about their experience more than it is for me. Um, Overall, I think team culture is just absolutely so crucial for coaches to identify their own team culture. That's something that I do when I work with coaches is to really get it set solid and what is that going to look like from the beginning of the season to the middle of the season to the end of the season, but then also within each step with along the way as well. How communication is going to happen, but I think a big thing, what I realized as a coach, I remember there was one session I had with my club team that I was working with where I was so frustrated afterward. But I went in there, I was having some sort of like personal stuff going on. I can't even remember what. And my energy that I was bringing to the field was reflected on my players. Like they were off, like all the touches were off. It was just like not an ideal training situation, which was unusual for them. But what I realized is like this is because of my energy was low and what I brought to that, it reflected onto the players. And so from then on, I learned I was like, okay, I have to make sure and get my energy and my mentality set before every training session. And to bring that energy, to bring that focus and that discipline and that intensity. Because if I'm not bringing it, then they're not going to bring it. And I learned how to navigate that because sometimes, like the day before a game, was always light. So I would go in with a little bit more lightness, but still like having demands on them. And so, they got to just feel it. They don't know it, but they can feel that energy. So I think that's my biggest advice to coaches is like your energy and putting it out there is going to impact everyone around you because they look for you, and they may not be able to identify it, especially as kids. but they will feel it and they will respond.
Yeah, and the that's beautifully said. And the awareness, you've said that so many times. The awareness is so big. And as I've been really becoming more aware and conscious of myself, you can really become aware of what's around you. I just want to share this story before we wrap up. I had an opportunity to I was sort of interviewing for a coaching job at a local club out here in Southern California, and I was sort of prefaced going in, so it wasn't that I totally became aware of this, but the I was aware that the team kind of had a rough year, and the coach is a great coach, but he's very tactical. Everything is like very tactical. And so I was like, they're looking for a new head coach, so they wanted to interview me. So I was going to go and run a training session, and I had a training plan, but I got there, and when the players came in, I could feel how low the energy was.
Mm.
And I just kind of looked around and just with very light-hearted just said, hey guys, like I'm happy to be here. Like, why don't we just have some fun, And it kind of like they kind of looked at me and were like, they didn't know what that meant. And so I was like, oh, okay. And so I very quickly had to come up with a fun exercise at the beginning of training session to let them know that like, hey, it's okay that we have fun, because I was aware of how low their energy was for multiple different reasons. But that, coaches, that's also the important thing about sport, especially the younger you are. There has to be that element of having fun. And I do believe, like you said, it comes from that coach. Starts with the coach.
Yep, totally. Yep. And that's just, yeah, brilliant that you were able to read those guys and to give them what they wanted. And that's a telltale sign that there was somebody they weren't enjoying, you know? And like the more, I don't care at any level. And I did this with you as well. I do this with all the people that I work with, even the professionals, is to go back to the joy of you get to play soccer for a living. And when there's money involved, when it's a job, it's sometimes hard to remember that, because the pressure is so real. But when you can go back to the joy of what you're doing, that's when you start to perform so much better, at any level. But that's great that you were able to read what those kids needed. And hopefully that gave them that little spark at least.
Yeah. So what would be your biggest tip to a coach for becoming more aware and more conscious of the team culture?
I mean, the big part of it is being aware of the self. The more you get to know yourself at a deep level and all parts of yourself, and that includes your shadow side, and what it's known as your ego for a lot of people. To me, I think there's healthy ego and then the unhealthy ego, and that's more the shadow side. The more you can come face to face with that and be comfortable with that, and to be so strong within yourself that you can face anything within yourself and from your past, it's being fully integrated in yourself. That is how you excel in life. You can, welcome every part of yourself. If you're always trying to push away, like, oh no, I'm not arrogant, or, I'm not this, or I'm not that, and you're running away from all your past decisions, of your life that weren't so great for you, and you're not fully encompassing who you are, you're going to have a hard time being fully in your power. So to me, that's why I'm doing this, and I know that's why you're doing this as well, is like the journey of self-awareness and consciousness. So that's a lot of it is working with people like us and reading books and listening to podcasts, and really to have that sense of self-reflection, and self-honesty. A lot of people, they have a hard time being honest with themselves, and it's a matter of the ego trying to stay intact, right? The stronger you can be within yourself, even facing those unhealthy or unhelpful sides of yourself. I shouldn't say unhealthy, but unhelpful sides of yourself. The stronger you are, the more you can take, essentially. And it still can be hard, but if you're always like too scared of your ego shattering, you're gonna operate whatever, 25, 50%. Maybe that's good enough, for some people. But if you want to get up to those higher levels, You got to come face to face with yourself.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Becoming aware of yourself, becoming honest with yourself and embracing really just who you are, all, good, and I say it in quotations, bad, but we're humans at the core, and none of us are perfect. And I think the coaches that model that as well, that say, I'm not perfect. I'm going to do my best, and I know you're not going to be perfect. I just ask that you try and do your best, and together we'll win and together we'll lose, but most importantly, we'll learn along the way and enjoy each other and try and succeed as a group. It becomes a beautiful thing. So
Yeah.
enjoyed it
Yeah.
today, Gabe.
Starts with that attention. Yeah.
Yeah. I
Um, yeah.
enjoy.
Sorry to cut you off there. Go ahead.
No, you're good. You're good. You close us out. You let us out. You close us out.
All right. Well, yeah, let us know first of all how people can get a hold of you and how you can support them.
Yeah, follow me on social media, particularly on Instagram and YouTube. That's where I'm sharing a lot of my message and tips and tricks. And I work with athletes in person for striker sessions, but also online on the mental performance side. So I have a website as well where you can find more information. We'll put that in the show notes. But yeah, you can sign up and book a free 30-minute call with me and learn if we'd be a good fit to work together. What about you?
You can go to my website and get all my socials. My website's aclearmind.com. And I work with parents, with players, and with coaches, because I believe we're all part of the same team. So you can also get a hold of me to do a free call to see if we're a good fit for each other. I have a lot of different online programs and free resources on there. So that's aclearmind.com. And we'll put both of our websites on the show notes. And yeah, Chris, really enjoyed this one with you today, and looking forward to the next one.
Likewise, Gabe, phenomenal information, and I'm sure it will be a source of positivity and of interest to a lot of people. So enjoyed it, Gabe.
Likewise.